But sometimes these old Douglas firs get a spiral grain and it's no good for lumber. It's also possible that they were just mainly logging for cedar, so this wasn't quite worth their time. But yeah, if you look around, this is like a recovering forest from a clear cut. You'll notice on the understory there's really very little vegetation or life. There's not a lot of biodiversity. It's almost like I don't know, a biological desert or whatever. And this is sort of the phase. This is like all these trees are the same age. They started when all the ground was clear. They grew up together, competing for light, got tall, and now they've got such a dense canopy that there's no light under. And as time goes on, some of these younger trees will fall over, they'll make a gap. It'll make better conditions for growth in the understory. You'll get more plants coming back in, better for wildlife. But at the same time, this is almost exactly when the forester would come in and say, oh, this forest is ready for clear cut. This is like, it's almost 100 years old, it's time to clear cut. So when you think about logging an old growth forest, you think of it in the context of a human life. It's permanent, you know, it's not gonna grow back in my life or in my children's life. It's gone permanently, at least in the context of my life. But when you think about like the reality of forestry, it's pretty much permanently gone. It's not gonna regrow. They let the forest grow for 70 or 100 years, and then before it develops all those attributes of old growth forests, they cut it again. You call that self-pruning. And different species have different capabilities, but those, you see these branches, most of them are dead. They're not getting enough light to like make it worthwhile for the tree, so the tree tries to get rid of it and sheds them off. And different species are better at that than others. Lots of these trees are falling over and dying, right? So they'll fall over and die, and then the tree beside it will take its place. But then eventually when the trees are big enough and they fall over and they die, the trees beside it can't quite take its place and it forms an actual gap. And it's all like a cycle, you call it succession, from a forest that goes from an open clear cut to a forest of pioneer trees that are the same. They start to die, and then you start to get really shade tolerant trees growing up under it that'll eventually take its place. I mean, most of the nutrients in this forest are in the foliage, and they defoliate, like take the foliage off the trees before they haul the logs off.
Oh, so that's in the ground, man.
But you also get, especially if it's a slope or a steep slope, you can get a huge amount of erosion. And if you lose any of the topsoil, then that's like, that takes so long to recover. I mean, these soils here, these soils are 11,000 years old, and they're relatively young. Soils take a really long time to form. And yeah, if you lose the soil, like you're not going to get a healthy forest there for a long time. You'll get pioneer species like red alder, and they'll start to, like this is a red alder right here, and it's really well adapted to coming in after forest fires, after clear cuts, after avalanches. It's happy to grow right on mineral soil. It doesn't need organic matter, and it fixes nitrogen, so it enriches the soil as it grows, and that sort of prepares it for the next wave of species to come in.
Exactly.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of really solid research that says, like, if you just grow Douglas firs and you cut them and you replant Douglas firs and you cut them and you replant them, you'll get like a significant decrease in productivity after like the second or third rotation. So they're actually starting to think, like you'll see there's a red alder, there's a Douglas fir, they grow really well together. So there's people suggesting we do like mixed planting and like maybe put a little bit more thought into some of the sites rather than just planting rows of the same species, which is not good at all for biodiversity. Obviously, it's kind of like a cornfield. Yeah, not that bad, but yeah, you know, like the Ancient Forest Alliance is, you guys have probably heard of the Avatar Grove, and that's become like the big flagship for BC's old growth forests. And it was a professor from UVic who filed the complaint with the Forestry Practices Board. Is that right? About how they were logging old growth in the area. So the Forestry Practices Board is like an independent, government-appointed watchdog of the forest industry. And they sort of reviewed the complaint. They said, no, they didn't do anything wrong. They followed the regulations, but they also said this complaint identifies like a big big lack of the government to like take care of the society's interests in old growth forests. There's not enough going on to satisfy the desires of society to like conserve a lot of these forests. So they said that the government has to create a new strategy. So right now is like, I don't know, a pretty important time. I think a lot of good could come out of this.
In BC, for some reason, it's still legal to clear cut forests that are up to 1,000 years old. In some parts of the world, like New Zealand and Japan, they've actually outlawed old growth logging. And so, you know, we're thinking it's about time to do something similar in British Columbia, where we have, in some places, like less than 10% of what was originally there. And you guys know the values that old growth forests have. They filter the air, they absorb carbon dioxide, they clean the water, they house biodiversity. They're a huge cultural importance to British Columbians, everybody, you know. I mean, I identify with forests like that, and I think a lot of other people do too.
Also the tourism thing.
Yeah.
And a really great example of how you can actually make like ecotourism out of old growth forests is about 3 kilometers away from here at the Capilano suspension bridge. And I don't know if you guys have been there, but there's a suspension bridge, which is kind of cool, but the cool part is these huge tall trees and the sky canopy they've built through it. And I was just reading today that the suspension bridge park attracts 800,000 visitors per year.
A little bit pristine, I don't think.
Yeah,
and it's one of those debated areas.
Oh yeah, it's so valuable ecologically. Like not only for producing, I mean it's huge, right? So not only for producing oxygen and cleaning the air, but for carbon storage. Whenever you have a situation where you have like the high water table or the really short seasons, all the biomass just layers up and doesn't decompose very rapidly. So you get those like fields of peat that are just pure carbon. So yeah, I mean the boreal forest in the north stores more carbon than the tropical forest, right? Even though the trees aren't very big, the soil is just layered up with peat.
How old do you think this forest?
My guess is like 500 years, but I don't.
Right.
Flying roll.
That's not like a camera?
Very wide.
Okay. Everyone say, I don't know, big tree? Big tree! Or Douglas fir. Big tree.
You gonna get a photo, John?
Hey, somebody take photos.
What's that?
Video. Oh!